The cold has killed more soldiers, explorers and travellers than bullets ever did. And, the most dangerous part is that it often feels quiet, slow and almost polite while it's doing it. That truth shaped an entire generation of survival knowledge in the 20th century, when people routinely faced freezing nights without electric heaters, high-tech sleeping bags, or chemical hand warmers. What they developed instead were smart, disciplined, and, brutally practical techniques that still outperform a lot of modern shortcuts. And here's the part most people miss. These methods weren't about comfort. They were about staying alive until morning. Let's get straight into it. Cold was the enemy everyone respected. By the early 1900s, cold weather survival was no longer theoretical. It was battlefield-tested, expedition-proven, and, written in frostbite and failure. From World War I trenches to Arctic exploration and remote rural living, freezing nights were a known killer. What made the 20th century different was scale. Millions of people were exposed to cold environments for long periods, and, patterns emerged fast. Certain habits kept people alive, others quietly got them killed. The biggest lesson learned early was simple and honestly a bit uncomfortable. Cold doesn't defeat you all at once. It drains you, decision by decision. That's why the techniques that survived weren't flashy. They were disciplined systems designed to manage heat, moisture, and energy through the night. One of the most important discoveries came from soldiers sleeping outdoors. The ground, not the air, was the biggest heat thief. Frozen earth pulled warmth from the body relentlessly, even when the air felt manageable. So people learned to insulate downward first. Straw, pine branches, folded coats, newspapers, cardboard, anything that created trapped air between the body and the ground mattered more than extra layers on top. During World War II, soldiers were trained to build sleeping platforms slightly raised off the ground whenever possible. Even just a few inches reduced heat loss dramatically. Civilians in rural areas did the same thing inside unheated homes, sleeping on stacked mats instead of bare floors. This wasn't just guesswork. It was observed, documented, and drilled into people because, it actually worked. These days, modern thinking says, bundle up. But early 20th century survival thinking said, manage sweat like it's poison. Sweating in the cold was, deadly. Moisture stole heat faster than wind ever could. Soldiers and outdoorsmen were trained to regulate layers constantly, even if it meant feeling slightly cold while moving. Wool became king for a reason. It retained warmth even when damp and dried faster than cotton. People avoided overdressing before sleep, changing into dry layers if possible, even when exhausted. Wet clothing was wrung out, aired, or placed near the body, not ignored. Here's the clever part. Some groups slept wearing fewer layers than expected. The logic was brutal but accurate. Less clothing meant less trapped moisture and better circulation under shared blankets or coats. Comfort was optional. Dry heat was not. These days, the idea of sharing body heat might sound, well, a bit extreme. But back in the 20th century, it was just standard procedure. Soldiers, you know, they slept close together. Expedition teams would share sleeping spaces too. Families often clustered in a single room during those cold winter nights. Heat was seen as a limited resource, something that really had to be pooled. Even animals played a role in this system. In rural areas, livestock shelters were built right next to living quarters because, honestly, the warmth from animal bodies made a real difference. This wasn't folklore. It was thermodynamics in action. Folks also learned to seal spaces intelligently, you know? Not airtight, but controlled. Blankets over doorways, rolled cloth at floor gaps, and low ceilings all helped trap warm air where it mattered most, near the body. Fire saved lives, but it also killed people who misunderstood it. By the mid-1900s, it was widely known that sleeping directly next to a fire was dangerous. Uneven heating caused sweating, dehydration, and increased risk of hypothermia once the fire died. Instead, people used fire to warm the environment before sleep. Dry clothing and heat stones, or metal objects that released warmth slowly through the night. Hot water bottles, heated bricks wrapped in cloth, and even warm tools were placed near feet or the core. This created steady, controlled warmth without moisture or flame risk. The goal wasn't to feel hot. It was to avoid the cold stealing energy while you slept. One of the most overlooked lessons was metabolic heat. People learned that what and when you ate before sleep directly affected survival. High-fat, high-calorie foods were preferred before nighttime. Fat burned slowly, producing sustained heat. Soldiers were often issued rations specifically meant for evening consumption, not because they tasted good, but because they kept the body warmer for longer. Alcohol, despite the myths, was largely avoided by those who knew better. You see, it created this false sense of warmth while actually increasing heat loss. The smart ones, well, they went to sleep fueled, hydrated, and calm, because, honestly, panic burned energy faster than cold ever could. Deep, uninterrupted sleep sounds ideal, but in freezing conditions it was actually risky. Many groups practiced light sleep cycles, waking periodically to check extremities, adjust layers, or rekindle warmth. Fingers, toes, ears and noses were monitored constantly. Early signs of frostbite were easier to reverse when caught early. Ignoring numbness was a fatal mistake, repeated often enough that it became a warning drilled into training manuals. What stands out most about 20th century cold survival wasn't the gear, it was the mindset. People were trained to look at ordinary objects as thermal tools. Paper became insulation. Cloth became seals, tin became heat reflectors, snow became a building material instead of an enemy. Snow shelters, for example, weren't just emergency tricks. They were intentionally built because, well, compacted snow insulated better than open air in extreme cold. Inside, temperatures stayed dramatically higher than outside, even without fire. This kind of thinking wasn't instinctive. It was taught, practiced, and respected. Modern gear is incredible, but it also creates dependence. Batteries die, equipment fails, situations change. The 20th century sits in a perfect historical sweet spot. Advanced enough to document what worked, primitive enough to rely on human systems instead of technology. These techniques don't replace modern tools. They back them up. They make you resilient when the plan falls apart. And, well, that's what real survival knowledge has always been about. Surviving a freezing night isn't dramatic. There's no heroic moment, just a slow, deliberate refusal to let the cold take what it wants. The people of the 20th century understood that better than most. They didn't fight the cold head-on. They managed it, contained it, and outlasted it. And every time you apply one of these forgotten techniques, you're tapping into a legacy built on hard lessons. And, honestly, harder nights. If you value this kind of real, historically grounded survival knowledge, stay connected with Legacy of Survival. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who thinks modern gear is enough. Because the past still has a lot to teach us. And, we're just getting started.